So there's no denying that Apple's growth is slowing. Samsung's
Correct.
is picking up. Are you considering changing anything about the way that Apple is positioned in either funds?
Well, we've actually, during this recent dip into the low 400s, we've actually added to our position. We think that the expectations on Apple have been driven so low that it has become a tremendous valuation story in and of itself, with a financial engineering component to that in the near term as Apple decides what to do with their cash and the ongoing dividend.
So my colleague Dominic Chu was just talking about the possibility of Apple boosting its dividend and saying exactly that it's going to perhaps bring in a whole different class of investor.
Yeah.
It sounds like you think that's true.
Well, I think it's going to bring in more investors. Let's look at these numbers. This is a company that, by the way, will earn more money than any other company in America this year, about $42 billion.
Which is a point worth making, right?
Net income. This is not a zombie company. It's not dead. $42 billion in net income. Exxon will be number 2 with about $35 billion. Exxon has 2.4 times the revenues of Apple, by the way. So Apple's $42 billion in net income. It's got $60 billion of EBITDA. It also has about $42 billion in free cash flow, of which they're paying out about $10 billion in the form of the dividend. Of the $42 billion in free cash flow, about $25 billion of that is generated here in the U.S., $10 billion going to the dividend. You can see how easy it would be to increase that dividend 50% to $15.7 billion, as Dom said. That's $15.7 billion out of the $25 billion generated here, out of the $42 billion generated globally. It's not a big deal. It's very doable, and we would expect something with, maybe that's the high end of the range of expectations, but we should see a really nice jump in the dividend soon.
How likely is it, if you were to play a guessing game, that this will happen? And Dom was talking about the timing, that more and more investors are really looking at March because this is when another such decision was announced. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it?
I think that a dividend boost of between 20 and 50% is probably an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. And I would say the outlying time period for that announcement would be the release of the March quarter earnings, probably the second week in April. It might come sooner. It might be this week because of the calendar anniversary of the announcement a year ago for the dividend.
Speaking of Apple, the competition with Samsung, what it means overseas, specifically China. I was reading a lot of blogs over the weekend that said, look, China Mobile is getting ready. There's 4G. That's good news for the iPhone. What do you think about market share? Because this has been a big criticism of Apple, right?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
In emerging markets, Apple is not going to get as big a footprint as it has here.
Yeah, well, let's talk about market share real quickly here, because you hear lots of talk about Apple losing market share. Apple's market share in smartphones was 19% a year ago. Globally, today it's 19%. They have not lost market share. You can't lose share you don't have. The share that Samsung has gained has been at the expense of the Nokias and BlackBerries and others.
Like Lenovo, Huawei, these kinds of players. Yeah.
Those are they've lost the market share. Apple has not lost the market share. So Apple isn't even addressing yet the largest part of this global smartphone market in the emerging markets. I believe that will happen this year with a lower priced phone. Their market share in the emerging markets is very small, and I would argue that over the next year or two, it's going to become significantly greater, not smaller. Their market share is so small, it can't get a lot smaller. It's going to go bigger, not smaller. They're going to address that market, which they haven't done, and I think a deal with China Mobile will be part of that process.
All right, but it sounds as, at least from what you're saying in China, that you feel like Samsung is not necessarily the only competitor that Apple has to at least be aware of. There's Lenovo, there's Huawei, there you gave the list there. BlackBerry, Nokia.
It's going to be a very competitive market. Obviously, China is there now, Apple is there now, but to a much smaller extent. It's addressing a very high end of the market. A lot of the phones are in the sort of black market phones that get unlocked and sold at very high prices. And so Apple's going to have to go in there with a lower price phone. It probably doesn't mean the end of this concern about gross margin. I think that's overly stated. I think the gross margin will be pretty stable. I think it will be somewhere between a 35 and 41% rate. And maybe that's a wider band than we'd like, but it's going to be somewhere in there over the next few years. You're making a lot of profit at that level. And so I think there's a lot of things that are going to work for Apple over the balance of this year: the valuation, the financial engineering, a product refresh, as well as deals with carriers like China Mobile with a lower price phone in the emerging markets.
All right. And Tim Cook, quick grade here so far. How's he doing as CEO?
I'll give him an A. Look, we're holding this company to a standard that we're not holding any other company to. Again, they're going to earn more money than any other company in America this year. It was just 12 months ago tomorrow that they initiated their first dividend. The company's doing terrifically. Wall Street, take your foot off the throat of Tim Cook and let him do his job. He's given us no reason to lack confidence in him.